think about these days, all I think about these days is getting at that goal that's in my heart. I need a reason to believe there may be a cure for my disease.
That song is by Blaine Long. My name is Matthew Blades. Meet my friends.
Hi, it's Tim.
And Beth from the Mulhausen Group Real Estate.
We are so proud to sponsor another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It. You can catch us at tmgphoenix.com.
That's a good group of people right there. Hi, it's Matthew Blades, host of Learn from People Who Lived It. And a reminder before we get into today's show that each of these episodes is presented uninterrupted with the support of the Mulhausen Group, with the support of ASI or Advanced Systems Integrations. They design and install cutting-edge audio and visual equipment. So if you're on the IT staff or you're the IT director, please reach out to ASI. This audio visual integrator has offices in Minnesota and in Scottsdale and 2 decades of experience. And the cool thing about them, they pay real close attention to that last 5%, which is the one that drives you and I crazy. We've got a link to ASI in our show description, or you can go there yourself by visiting asi-av.com.
Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
My name is Melinda, and I am 40 years old.
Melinda, what story are you here to share?
I'm here to share my own story of overcoming trauma and coming out the other side, and to let other people know that there is a brighter side, sometimes even when it's the hardest thing you can imagine.
Yeah. Who do you hope hears this?
Primarily, I think that when I really needed to hear this, for me, it was when I was in between a teen and a young adult, was when kind of all of these things that I've learned in my life, I really learned. And I hope that if they're suffering in silence, that they really hear it and understand that because their life feels out of control, because they're not in control of their own life, that there is light at the tunnel, and that they can be in control of what they can be in control of and do something different, and not just, blame other people for their circumstances.
Sure. Boy, lots to get into today. Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It. Dr. Frank Bavacqua, as always, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one. If you're watching any video clips of this podcast online, you're seeing in the backdrop there that Melinda has this backdrop. So it says Hop Jacks, and we're going to talk about that. But briefly, she's in the space of helping other people heal. And there's usually a pretty solid reason that somebody's in that job. And boy, it's not a mistake, is it? So we're going to talk about a lot of things here today, Melinda, but you know me, I love to start with that 0 to 10 lens and get a really clear idea of, who you are. What was the first 10 like? But Dr. Frank, in this particular episode, we're going to stretch the limits a little bit, and we're going to let you talk about what happened all the way until you were 11 and a half, okay?
Whoa.
And there's a reason for that. Hang on, Dr. Frank, hang on. So give us an idea, Melinda, who you are and what life is like for you coming up.
I was born into a family. My mother and father were both alcoholics and drug addicts. I was born addicted to heroin. She was a heroin and opiate prescription drug abuser. I have been told multiple times that I am lucky that I came out with 10 fingers and 10 toes, and I did. So that's always good. And also fortunate that in part of my young life that I had my grandmother, my mother's mother, to help raise and take care of me, which I think was a great contributor to how I turned out today. My mother was not young when she had me. She was 29 years old and perfectly capable of taking care of a baby. She had a baby prior to that, very young, at 16, my sister. And my maternal side of my family is very religious and Catholic. And obviously that was having a baby so young was not, it was frowned upon back in the day, and they wanted to shun her. So that's kind of how probably my mother's addiction started. But for me, being born into that situation, like a lot happened from 0 to 10. So I can go into lots of details, but just with that first inches, I'll let you jump in, Matthew. And
this is the first time that I've ever talked to anybody who has described themselves as a baby addicted to heroin when you were born. Dr. Frank, I don't know how much exposure you've got along the way to this type of thing, but what is that like? I mean, I know you don't know about it when you're going through it, but what are there long-term implications of that kind of thing? What stays with you when you're born addicted to heroin?
I think there are definitely long-term effects that can happen. My understanding from when I was born is that one of the things about heroin is, as my mother, I guess, did try to use less and less of it, but it doesn't cross the placenta like alcohol does, and cause like alcohol-induced, fetal alcohol-induced syndrome. And so it doesn't affect the fetus quite like heroin does or opiates. And so I personally have not felt the effects long-term, or I've not had any long-term effects to the best of my knowledge. I know that I did go into some withdrawal when I was an infant, and they treated me for that. And actually my mother, her gallbladder exploded in the hospital right after I was born. And so she stayed in the hospital, and I actually went home with my grandmother. I didn't even go home with my mother at the time. So, but as far as I know, and Frank, you can, jump in here. I mean, I think it depends really on the use, the kind of drug, and then how if you're an IV drug user versus a prescription drug user. I think it can be multiple things, and then how much you're using, and how it affects the fetus long term. I know that my mother, as much as my mother and father drank, it was mostly my father who drank and did the heroin and opiates, mixed with some other things, meth included. My mother told me that she used less drugs than when she was pregnant with my brother. And I was like, I'm not sure if I feel special about that.
Thank you.
Right? But I'd love to hear Frank's response also about, because
I can honestly say this is a world or a situation that I don't know a whole lot about. I'm just kind of wondering along maybe with everybody else. Is there any part of that situation that makes either you or someone like you sort of more predisposed to becoming addicted to drugs themselves later in life? Because we know that there's a biological component to addiction. Does that play into what happens later on for you or anyone else in that situation?
And I 100% believe that both of my family members, obviously my mom and my dad, I have been terrified my whole life that I would struggle with opiates if that ever occurred to me. So I've never tried heroin. If I ever had to be on a pain pill, I was literally dying in pain. And then I was super cautious about it because I think it's like chocolate ice cream. If you've never had chocolate ice cream, you don't know what you're missing, or chocolate in general. And I can assure you that I know that there's a reason why people are addicted to opiates and to heroin. And that it's just like cigarettes, right? I've never had to drag off one cigarette. I don't need to know, because I already know that I'm predispositioned to that I'm going to love it, and it's going to take a hold of me. And so I've always been very cautious about specifically heroin and opiates, because I already know I'm going to like it. I guarantee it. I have no doubt. Right? There's a reason why people use it.
I tend to be with you, Melinda, and I don't mind sharing this story briefly, but because it's going to come out of my book anyways. But when I was in my early 20s, I tried cocaine for the first time, and I was super drunk, and somebody brought it into the room, and I took it, and I felt sober, and I was like, "What is this? What is this?" And I liked it so much that I never touched it again. And it was that same kind of thing, because addiction really does run in my family. But boy, it's pretty smart on you to have that's a healthy fear, right? I don't think there's a lot of good fear out there, but that seems to be a healthy fear for you to wrestle with. No?
Yeah, I think it's a healthy fear. I didn't drink alcohol till I was 21. I'm still very cautious with it. I do double check in with myself, thinking, okay, did I cross the line? Have I crossed the line? Because it's a constant worry for me. Because it runs so deep in my family. So yeah, no, I definitely believe that. I think it's a healthy fear, or just just keeping yourself in checks and balances on yourself to be like, is this good or not? So
yeah. So
well, and Matthew, how many times have we seen across different guests there, one of two things tends to happen. Either there's some sort of family pattern, and then the person that we're talking to, repeated that pattern for some period of time, and then they're trying to break it later. Or kind of like Melinda did now, okay, I recognize kind of where I came from, and I'm going to kind of immediately reject it and go, the complete opposite direction. It's really one of those two things in every instance.
It is, and that second is what I refer to as that transitional character in your lineage. You're really the person that is here to get the family out of that place and bring them into some new energy and a new way of thinking about things and doing things. And I mean, you're a great example, Melinda, because I don't know if you have children now, but you've been able to break a generational cycle just in yourself. I'm assuming your children, if you have any, were not born addicted to heroin.
No.
Right? I mean, you've already broken one generational cycle, and that might seem comical to some people. Like, congratulations, she wasn't on heroin too. But I don't think you need to understand the power of drugs and what they will make you think and do and feel. Melinda, if I'm not mistaken, you're 5 years old the first time your mom tries to kill herself. So let's talk about the power of drugs. That's a real thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think just like what you're talking about, the power of deciding you're going to be or do something different. So, I mean, can I pinpoint it exactly? It was somewhere between probably 5 and 7 years old that this happened, this occurred. And I'm sure my mother had tried to kill herself before that I remember. But what was different about this time was that she wanted to kill us first and then kill herself. And I remember her like having with the heroin needle, right? Obviously, and she was going to inject us first and then kill herself. And I thought, obviously, what kid likes needles, right? Not me, not any kid. And I begged her not to. So my brother and I are about 18 months apart. I think it's actually 16 months exactly. And that's why I was like between 5 and 7, because either he was 5 and I was 7, or 5. Like we were right in that age range. And I remember telling her, I remember standing with her in the bathroom and telling her no, and I don't want to do this. I don't want any part of this, like scared and just kind of like run. And we were hiding from her like in the living room. And of course she was probably intoxicated, I assume, at that point. And I just remember my brother and I just crying and begging her not to commit suicide and begging her not to inject us with drugs. And at that point,
can I ask what she was saying to you, Melinda? Like, what is she saying? Like, I'm going to get you. I want to kill you. We have to do this.
No, it was more like just, I'm sorry. I think like all people in general who are addicted to heroin or opiates, if you ever go to like a methadone clinic and you go to a group, right, their biggest regret is all of the things that their addiction has done to their family. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't so much that. It was like, right, she was old enough to take care of 2 kids, old enough to not have kids if she didn't want to. Like the fact that she was not doing a good job of taking care of 2 kids at that point, I think just in general of not being able to take care of us and like the job that she had done, she knew, right? She was raised in a very good family. My grandmother had 4 kids and raised them primarily on her own because my grandfather was a prisoner of World War II and was ill. So like my mom knew right from wrong. I mean, she knew what she was doing was wrong. And so I think that the guilt, I think to this day, the guilt for what happened when we were children and at that point in time was just too much for her. And because of the drugs, that just amplifies it and makes it worse. And I think that she just wanted it to be over, but she knew that if she ended her life, what would happen to her children, right? So like if we could just all be together, so it was more of like, I'm sorry. It wasn't like, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to get you. It was just like, I'm so sorry. You know what I mean? So it wasn't so much like wanting to kill us as it was just like, I can't go on like this anymore.
She was just completely broken down and sad. She was just sad. There's no other way to put it. She really didn't see a good future, right, for herself or her kids.
No.
And yeah, isn't it amazing, Dr. Frank? I want to bring you in and have this little conversation on guilt and shame because, and I'm not picking on Melinda's mom in the least, but there's a million women who have had an early pregnancy and then had a religious family make them feel a certain way about that thing. What can we say to counsel people like that?
I mean, if it were as easy as like, oh, don't worry about what other people think. I mean, how much easier would all of our lives be if it were that easy, right? And obviously we're talking about some of the most extreme cases, but most of us on a day-to-day basis get impacted at least a little bit based on other people's thoughts and opinions of us, right? It's why most of the time we'll, do something simple like make sure our hair isn't a mess before we go out in public, right? It's all about other people and their perception, right? And that's something simple and superficial, and yet it enters most of our mind on most days. When we're talking about, doing something that some people in your family, so the people that are most important to you, are now, considering sinful. Like we're on a whole different level. We're way past whether my hair is fixed and how I look out in public. It's not easy, right? You kind of have to separate, who is this person and why are they important? And yet this opinion of theirs is either not important or now we have to decide, well, maybe this person is not important. I mean, it takes, months and sometimes years of unpacking. It's not one-time advice that changes everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and then your mom grows up with this. And I mean, unless I'm really reading this situation wrong, it's probably what leads her down the road of, drugs and alcohol, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. She'd been using drugs and alcohol. Like my sister was born when she was 16 and a half. And she had been addicted to alcohol and drugs probably from 18 till forever. So
yeah, it's always bothered me because I too grew up in a religious house, and not that religion bothers me in the least. I think there's a really beautiful place for it, and people can use it very, very, very. Just that's the word, beautifully. It can be that kind of a thing. But there's got to be. We have to find this balance between black and white in so many situations with regards to, how it's supposed to go, or at least we need to figure out and have a better system for when people fall short of whatever this impossible measuring stick is, for some folks, because the alternative is what you just explained. The alternative is that some people choose this path and then look what happens as a result. It's not just your mom that was impacted, right? Your dad's impacted. The kids are impacted. Future generations have to deal with the ramifications of that shame. That should be pointed out. So I hope that as the years go by, we will get better at figuring out how to deal with the folks that, like I said earlier, have fallen short of whatever this measuring stick is that some people have.
It's about love, right? I don't think any religion they measure it's a measuring stick, but it's really about love. And I think this probably happens now, this day and age, like what happened to my mom back in the day, but kind of coming current even today is like kids, young teens who, say that they're gay or bi or have a different sexuality, and the church doesn't accept that. And then they try to do things like conversion therapy because they're not accepting and it's, not part of their religion. I think that there's no religion that just teaches that you're supposed to love the person as they are and be with them in their path. And that hopefully that someday we can all come to that, regardless of the measuring stick or the religion.
Yeah, well, it'd be a great day, that's for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so your mom and you and your brother have this moment, and clearly you're still here. So you don't get injected with the drugs, as you said. How does that day end?
Yeah, we fell asleep crying, and I believe that she fell asleep passed out from drugs in the bathroom, which was common in my childhood and in my life, that there was often times that she would get high and pass out. And maybe I could wake her, maybe I couldn't wake her, which obviously is scary for a kid because you're not sure if your mom is alive or not. But I mean, this kind of, I wouldn't say this was the beginning, but I was taken away by CPS multiple times from 0 to 12 years old. And so this was third time maybe. I mean, I knew the white car very specifically that DCS, and CPS used to drive, and being terrified of that, because really no matter what kind of trauma you're going through when you're such a small child, all you want to do is be with your mom, right? Because you have no idea what the things that are happening in your life. You just have this connection to your mom. You just want to be with your mom. I rescued her and saved her and protected her and did all of these things, and then took care of my brother, most of the time, because I always felt like I was, 7 years old with a 5-year-old kid, at all times of my life, because that's just the way it had to be.
Can I ask you a question quickly?
Yeah.
While you're talking about this, you're saying, we were taken away by CPS a few times. At any point in those 3 times that you were taken away, was that better for you?
So, it's hard to say. I was very fortunate when CPS took me away. My grandmother, in the beginning, was the first person to take us in. And then as I evolved here through life, we also had family friends that would take us in. So I never had to go to like a foster home. So I always went to another home that I was familiar with. And I was very fortunate in those moments. And like I said, contributed to how I became who I am today, because I had other outside influences who showed me a different way. So but I still didn't like it. Like, even though I lived with my grandmother and that was fine, it was still living with your grandmother, right? Like, it was not your mom, right? And when I was little, I didn't understand why I couldn't live with my mom. And I fought to live with her because I didn't really understand. I think I understood some of it, but I didn't really understand like the dangers because I just wanted to be with my mom, just like all kids do.
Could a couple of psychologists here, a couple of people that are trained, you two, have a conversation about that? What does the training tell you in that situation? Is the child being removed from that event better or worse? Or, I'm not asking for you to pick a side here. I want to be super clear about that. That's not what this podcast is about. The podcast is about understanding it more. So what's the tug of war there? What's better? What's worse?
There's a reason why, if we're talking about like courts and kind of like severing a parent's rights, that kind of a thing, that the bar is so incredibly high for essentially how terrible the situation has to be before a child is removed from a parent. Despite lots of negative things that a parent might do, there is still a huge benefit to child being with biological parent. And it's unfortunate because, in some ways, common sense would say remove child from, what seems like terrible situation, put them in a better environment, and boom, everything is fixed. And that's just not the way that we're wired, right? Whoever we come out of the womb and bond with immediately, we need that person in some way, shape, or form. And it's real hard to, get kind of everything you need if you're ever fully removed from that person. It's not, unlike somebody who just loses a parent to a death when they're young. You don't have that person.
I would love,
and in a lot of ways, you need that person.
Yeah. And Melinda, I'd love for you to piggyback on that, because I'll tell you, when I see these situations like other people in the TV and in the movies and things, one of the first thoughts that I have is, oh my God, they're going to take away her kid. She's going to go get shit-faced right now. Are you kidding me? She's not going to be able to handle that. Now you got kid freaking out over here, and mom's going to double down on drugs. You experienced it. I don't know. Am I making that up, or is that sometimes how it plays out?
That's 100% how that plays out. And I think that what Frank is saying is that it's obviously in the best interest of the child to keep them with their parents, as long as it's not a major safety risk factor, right? Louis,
Right.
when I used to work for CPS, because I did so, my early career, that if the parents were homeless, right, but capable of caring for their children in an appropriate manner, and there was no safety concerns, then they got to raise their kids to the best of their own ability. Every parent has a parenting ability, and as long they get to raise their kids in any way that they want to, as long as it doesn't impose a safety risk. In my case, obviously, there was a safety risk. I remember in the same apartment that my mother used to leave us home for days at a time. And I ran into a neighbor as an adult, and she was like, I remember you. She was like, and your brother. She was like, do you remember when you used to want to knock on the wall? Because it was obviously an apartment, so we shared a wall. She was like, when your mom was gone for too long and you ran out of food, you would knock on the wall and ask me for food because you knew that you weren't allowed to go out of the house. Like, there was, I look back now as an adult and with children myself, like the safety risk factor in my household with my mother was significant, right? It wasn't just like I was mad at my mom because she grounded me because I got a D in school, right? That's not what that was. It was
You were eating.
Right. There was, she was leaving us alone. Yeah, there was neglect on many different levels. And so that is a major risk factor versus just, homeless parent is doing the best that they can and parenting in the best of their abilities. Even if it's not the same parenting that you and I would do, it's still parenting to the best of their abilities.
Yeah. Well, this is not too dissimilar from Topher's story. If you remember that, Dr. Frank, I mean, his mom tried to commit suicide a couple of different times. And one of the things that came out in our podcast was like, wow, like some people have to survive their parents. It's not enough. Like some people don't get to just come in and do this thing. Like some people actually have to survive their parents first.
Right.
And I just wonder, I think I know, but you guys can talk about it. Those long-term implications of that kind of a thing, the neglect that you felt as a child, how is that when you're in your 20s and in relationships with other people and they don't give you something that you need and boom, you're triggered and now it's like worst guy ever, right? Let's talk about that. How does that stuff show up in people's lives? You can be specific and talk about yourself, or you can generalize. I don't care.
The neglect, I would say, was different. How it affected me, the neglect, I don't remember there being as many food insecurities. Like, I remember being hungry sometimes and not knowing where my next meal was coming from. But I was more worried about the people coming in and out of my house, if my mom was going to be home, if she was going to be sober or not, if there was a lot of domestic violence when I was a kid. There was a lot of physical abuse to me. So I think most of my trauma that entered into my adult life that I still have to keep reins on is more of different kinds. And it's different for different people, right? So for me, it was living in a very dirty house, right? So like I lived my house was so dirty at one point. My mother was obviously never very clean because she was never very high functioning, because she was always using drugs. So, but my house was so filthy at one point in my life when I was 11. I think I was 11. I had an appendicitis and my appendix almost exploded. And I went into shock and they went in and took my appendix out. But they're like, oh, it looks okay. But when they sent it to the lab and cut it open, it was full of worms. And it was full of worms from me living in a filthy house. So for me as an adult, right, I have a hard time in my own house if there's like clutter or things, if my house becomes like in a disarray, like that triggers my trauma. And I know that trauma is from me living in a filthy house and it causing me not only medical problems, but like emotional problems. It also caused I didn't have clean clothes like a lot of times when I was a kid. So I was bullied a lot in school because I was didn't have the Nikes or whatever. And so for me, it's more of that trauma that's transferred into my adult life. And I'll let you jump in because there's obviously that it affects, that's just like one portion of the trauma on top of like the relational things that happened and attachment things.
I think Melinda laid out a lot of that really, really well. The toughest part is when we are let down by the people who should not let us down. Like out of all people, like we said, our parents are in theory the people that we should be able to count on the most. And some people are able to count on their parents, their entire lives. I still feel lucky that I have both of my parents. And honestly, like if I needed something, I could call them up, in 20 minutes, and ask them for some kind of help with something. And that's awesome. And I don't take that for granted. And unfortunately, not everybody experiences that. And when early on we learn that even the people who we should be able to universally count on, we can't. Sometimes it can be hard to figure out who we can count on later. Or sometimes we've seen, the standards that people kind of set for themselves in terms of like the partner that they choose. That partner doesn't seem to meet standards that maybe you or I would have, but they were used to such sort of chaos growing up that, this person comes along and it's like, well, this is what it felt like growing up. So this must be what I get. It's unfortunate. There's no better way to put it. It's unfortunate.
Okay, out of respect for your time, we're going to take a quick break. If you want to jump right back into part 2, cool. We're going to talk about tools and what she does on the daily when those traumas get triggered. So many incredible things in this episode, don't you agree? Gosh. All right, a quick break. See you for part 2 when you're ready.